In this video I'm back at Cardigan Bay and I'm fishing a venue I hadn't seen before. I'm at Llansanffraid, which is part of a Llan-non stretch. Sincere apologies to anyone who's Welsh watching this, since I don't think my pronunciation is quite right. This is an October session after bull huss, and as you can see I'm the only one here. You park on top of a low cliff and it's a short walk along a path to where there's some steps leading down to the beach. If you're fishing over high water you'll be fishing from a shingled beach and casting over mixed ground. So it's worth looking at it at low water to see where the sand patches are. I'll be fishing over low water, setting up on a rough ground and hopefully casting onto clear ground. First I've got to get my gear down onto the beach and look over the area just in case I want to fish part of a flood. The ground's not completely flat, so you may find that there's a gully behind you when the tide starts coming in. I'll make a mental note of where the clearer areas are just in case I have to come back and fish another session over high water. The weather started okay, but deteriorated quite quickly. This made filming rather difficult, so this video is not as long as my usual ones. This is only one session, and it was quite successful. However, I have decided to break it up with a rig tutorial, since I haven't got an awful lot of footage of it. That will be on my preferred rig type for bull huss and rough ground in general, in other words, the pulley pennel, and variations of that, which includes an up and over pulley. Before I set one of those up though, I'll try and see if I can get away with a 2-hook flapper, with sand eel and ragworm, just in case there might be rays and bass about. It'd be nice to catch one of those, but realistically I'm just expecting dogfish and bull huss. Because there might be some rough ground, I am fishing quite heavy, with 40-pound hook lengths. My reel line is 30-pound braid. On the pulley rig I'm expecting to be using squid. Mackerel or bluey could be a good alternative, but I haven't brought any with me. And if you could get hold of peeler crab, that would obviously also be a good bait to try. My ragworm are pretty large, since I'm not expecting to be fishing for flatfish. I'm leaving some of my gear on slightly higher and drier ground, even though the tide is still on its way out. There's a fair amount of weed on the rocks and poking through the sand where the rocks are underneath the sand. After a storm I'd imagine there'd be a fair amount of that floating in the water, which I'm hoping won't be the case today. If you fish braid and you're expecting to haul in quite a bit of weed, you don't really want to go below 30-pound reel line. I'm casting out a reasonable distance since I'm not expecting to be fishing into the surf, and since the wind is from behind there's not much of a surf anyway. I'm feeling my way in by fishing only one rod to begin with. That allows me to see if I need leads with wires or even possibly rods and bottom rigs. Since I can drag my rig, I'm thinking it's probably fairly clean ground. That should make the session more enjoyable, since I won't be having to pull for a break and losing gear. It also means I won't have to set up my other rod with a rig which has got a rod and bottom. Before I do set up my other rig though, I will run through the locational details. My first video from Cardigan Bay gives a full regional setting, but here I'm just going straight into the area which I'm more familiar with. Tiryn, Borth and Clarick Bay are north of Aberystwyth. Llansanffraid, Aberarth and this venue are north of Aberaeron. Zooming in, you can see that we're not that far south from Llansanffraid, which is one of my favourite venues along this stretch. Llansanffraid can be considered to be part of Llan-non, but regarding access to the beach they're separated by a bit of a distance. There is a picnic area, but there aren't any public toilets where you park, and you're parking on grass, so it's best to be there on a dry day. It's safe and it's easy to get onto the beach, and I've now shown where I've fished for this session. It's already started to drizzle, but it's not pouring down just yet, so I'm not putting my jacket on. I've set up my pulley rig now, and this one incorporates a bait shield, although that won't be what I'll be showing in the tutorial. I'll keep that simple and just show how I make my rigs when I'm expecting to be fishing over rough ground. Bait shields just help with casting larger baits, but don't really want those if you're going to be losing a lot of gear. And I'm now not expecting that to happen in this session. Since the tide is still retreating, I'm moving my gear a bit closer to the water's edge. Not my rucksack or rod bag though, they're staying on drier ground. Something's had a go at my bait, although I haven't spotted a bite just yet, so I'm probably thinking that there's a few crabs about. There's a few larger drops of rain now, which might affect quality of this video, since I can't spend much time cleaning the camera lens. Before I cast out my pulley rig, I'll explain how I make them in general. The more basic ones can be made up on the beach. The one with the bait shield is on the left hand side here, and an up and over version is on the right. But I'm going to start by showing how I make the simple one, which is in the middle. They are quick to make and very few components are needed, which is a bonus if you're losing lots of gear. So these short snood versions are the ones I normally use if there's rough ground. I'll leave a rod and bottom set up for a video where I'm actually using one. 2 swivels and 2 beads are required, as well as a clip for your lead. The rig's main body line will be between about 60 and 65 centimetres. The hook length for big mouth hooks needs to be about 10 centimetres shorter. I'm working on that first using 50-pound mono. If you're having a pennel set up like here, then it's ideal to have one of the hooks having a bent eye. This is put on first, and you can use a bit of silicone tubing to keep things quite neat. I'm using a uni knot here to tie the other hook on, but you can use whatever knot you prefer. Need to pass the end of the line through the loop at least 3 times. You can use a pair of pliers to tighten up the knot. And then clip the tag end to make it neat. I'm cutting line at 55 centimetres, since you need about 5 centimetres for the knots. Now for the main body line of the rig, for which I'm using 80-pound line. This needs to be longer than the hook length, so I'm cutting at 65 centimetres. Using another uni knot, I'm tying on a size 4 swivel. Here I'll be attaching the hook length. then thread on one of the beads, and then a size 2 swivel, and that will be attached to my reel line, normally to a leader, but sometimes direct to the line if I'm using, say, a 50-pound braid. Then the upper bead is threaded on, which just leaves having to tie on a clip, whatever type you prefer, to attach your lead to. Again, I prefer to use a 3 or 4 turn uni knot, although you could use a blood knot. Before I attach the hook length, I put on a lead. This will help when I'm trying to judge that the hook length is the right length. The hook length is tied to the size 4 swivel. The whole process is pretty quick, and as I mentioned before, this can be done on the beach. My bottom hook can be hooked onto the clip or the lead itself. The beads are there to cushion some of the pressure on the knots. Your reel line or leader is tied to the end of that size 2 swivel. Now for a variation if you want your rig to have a longer hook length. If you require more movement of the bait, then an up and over rig is quite useful. You'll need to swap over your size 2 swivel with one which is attached to a clip with a hook. I won't bore you with a description of every part of the process this time. I've tied up the main body of the rig first, and it's of pretty much the same length as the previous one. For the hook length, I'm using a single size 3 big mouth hook. With a lighter hook length you'll get more movement of the bait, but don't go too light since you're after big fish with this rig. So here I'm using 40-pound mono. Since it's an up and over rig, you'll be doubling up the length of the hook length. So in this case that's 90 centimetres. You normally want to wet your knot before tightening up, but I thought I'd save the viewer the sight of my saliva. The rig is finished, and this is what it should look like when you're ready to cast out. Back to the fishing, and I could have used one of those rigs I've made at the end of that tutorial. Since it doesn't appear to be snaggy here, a longer hook length might have been useful. After dragging both rigs, I get my first bite. My first fish is to the sand eel, and it's a dogfish. Not the target species, but at least I'm off and running. Having returned that fish, it looks like something's taken an interest in the bait on my other rig. Unfortunately, there's a bit of weed on my line which I need to get rid of before I wind the fish in. That's better. Not in size, but it's a huss this time. That looks like another bite, which is a good sign. I didn't hit it, so I'll leave a bait out there just in case the fish wants another go. think I'm in this time. And it is another huss. This one's taken a squid on a pulley-pennel rig. Pliers were needed to get the bottom hook out. Plenty of action now. One or two fish do manage to find snags, but I haven't lost any yet. Another huss, this time to the ragworm, and it seems to be that the smaller ones are taking the ragworm. With plenty of bites, it seems to be easier just to fish one rod. The rain's got a lot worse now, so I've had to put the jacket on. I'm not that bothered about the weather though, since the fish are still biting. That smaller one's got itself wrapped round a line. I then get a run of decent sized ones, but as luck would have it, I couldn't film much of that because of the rain. This one's probably just under £5 and pretty lively. Due to the rain, I left just as the tide started to flood. It came in pretty quickly. By the time I got to my vehicle, it had already covered where I was standing. Apart from the weather, a pretty enjoyable session. I ended up with 13 bull huss and a single dogfish. I didn't weigh any of them, but I'm guessing that a couple of bull huss were over £5.